So here is the corrections of the assignment concerning the partial equilibrium model of the introductions of world market. So here is the GAMS files, which is the corrections of the assignment we requested you to do. So the file starts with explanations of what the program is, the assumptions, but also a kind of waiver, meaning that just want to say that this model cannot be used to make economic policy recommendations, and also there are some copyright issues. So all these explanations are between the instructions $untext and $of_text. So the program really starts with declarations of a set R, which is the set of countries and regions, so 14 countries or regions. So what we are going to do is that we are going to need a subset of R, which consists in all these elements except the last one, rest of the world. So to define this subset, in fact, I can make these declarations between $untext and $of_text here, which means that I declare the subset other, a subset of R. I add a text, which means that this set consists in other countries or regions than the rest of the world, and I'm listing all these countries or regions. There is a more concise way to define this subset. So I declare a subset of R, which I call ROW, which consists in a single element, ROW, the rest of the world. And then I declare also another subset, which is other, which is a subset of R. And just after declaring these sets, I write other of R is equal to not ROW of R, which means that other includes all the elements which are not in ROW, but which are in R. Okay, so it means that it is a complementary, the complement of ROW within R. Okay, so just to explain this very concise way to define a subset. Declarations of parameters, there is nothing very interesting here, so this is very traditional. Then the entry of data starts with a table called data, with the rows which are the countries and the columns which are the variables. So after this table with data on consumption, supply, import duties and export taxes for all regions and countries in R except ROW, I can in fact give value to import tax, export tax, initial consumption, initial supply for all the countries which are in other subset of R, meaning that in fact I give value for all the countries except ROW. Why? This is because I'm going to in fact deduce from other data the level of this value for ROW. I can give other values to the whole initial price, the total supply of wheat in tons, import duty in the rest of the world, export tax in the rest of the world, then a table for elasticities, okay, the calibrations, which is really important. So in this calibration, you have only 6 equations. So I remind you that this calibration is aimed at giving values to all the parameters which will be used in the model. So for example, A and C, which are size parameters of supply and demand functions. So I give value to A, C, and C by this last 2 equations. I also give value to initial local price, P0 in R. I will also give value to initial consumption and supply in the rest of the world region. At the end of the calibration, I must be sure that when I will have initialized all variables in their initial value, all the equations will be strictly respected. That is to say, left-hand side is equal to right-hand side. Is it the case here? Yes, because in fact, with these last two equations, I know that the supply function equations and the demand functions equations will be respected. With this equation on P0, the relations between P0 and PE0, I know that the price linkage equations will be respected. And with these first three equations, I know that the equilibrium on the world market will be respected. In fact, these three equations, as I already gave a value to ST0, I can say that the total demand for wheat in the world is equal to ST0, and then I can deduce a value for the initial consumption and initial supply in the rest of the world. So I want to also to mention that the order of these equations is very important. For example, I have to give a value to P0 before giving a value to A and C, because A and C necessitates a value for P0. Okay, so I declare variables. I initialize the variables of the model. So for example, the first equation here means that I have the current value of P, which is equal to P0, okay? And then I declare equation of the models. And so here you've got the model. So supply function, demand function, the price linkage, the relations between local price and the world price, and finally the equilibrium on the world market, that is to say total demand is equal to total supply. I define the model by calling it wheat world market, and it consists in all equations which are within the GAMS file. So here you've got only 4 blocks of equation. Be careful because there are only 4 blocks of equations, but the first 3 equations are defined on the set R. So it means that each of these block of equations is defined for 14 countries or regions. So you've got a model with 14 plus 14 plus 14 plus 1 equations, that is to say 43 equations. Okay, so I can ask for a first resolution of the model, a first solve of this model. It is a square system, so I can use the CNS solver. So this first solve is only to check that initial infeasibility is nil or close to 0. And then I apply a shock, which is the removal of all import duties and export taxes. But you remember that there are only import taxes in this model. All the export taxes are initially equal to 0. So I ask for a second solve, and then I can ask GAMS to calculate some parameters, which are growth rates of local demand, local supply, local price, and world price in percentage. And here you've got a demand for a display of these parameters. So if I press on run, so the first solve, you see that the initial infeasibility is very close to 0. Then the second shock, the second solve, you got an initial infeasibility which is close to 406. Okay, so it's normal. If you look at the results, then you've got the results here. So you've got an increase in the world price of wheat, which is normal, because in fact you remember that the shock is only removal of import duties in the world. So it means that imports are increasing, and so demand is increasing for wheat, and so the world price is increasing. So concerning local prices, so you've got in countries which do not have any change in policy, like France, Australia, Germany, or UK, they do not have any change in policy because import duty is equal to 0 and export tax is equal to 0. So the variations of local price is equal to the variations of world price. In countries like China and Turkey, you remember that you've got a very high import duty, more than 60%. So on one side, the removal of the import duty make the local price decrease, and on the other side, the increase in the world price make the local price increase. So the first effect is much greater, so it means that there is a reduction in the local price in China and Turkey, while in other countries this is the second effect, which is greater, the increase in the world price. And so from variations in the local price, you can understand how consumption and production varies. Why? Because for China, for example, you've got a decrease in the local price, or Turkey. So it means that you have an increase in local demand, and you have reductions in local production. Okay, while in countries like France or Australia, in fact, you've got an increase in the local price. Okay, and so it means that you've got a decrease in local consumption and an increase in local supply. If I want to look at the other policy, which is the application of an export tax of 20% in Ukraine and Russia. So what's happening right now? So I make a new run of the model. So you see that again the initial solve, you've got an initial infeasibility which is close to 0. Then you've got a second solve with a shock, meaning that the initial infeasibility is now strictly positive. If you look at the results, what happened here is that you've got in fact an increase in the world price of wheat. Why? Because you've got an export tax in two countries, so it means less exports in these two countries, and so with less exports, less supply of wheat on the world market, and so an increase in the world price of wheat. So in all countries, it's very easy to understand how varies local price, because in fact in all countries where there is no change in policy, like Africa, like France, like Australia, the variations of local price is equal to the variations of world price. But Ukraine and Russia, you've got a decrease in the local price. Why? This is because, in fact, with export taxations in these two countries, in fact, farmers now wants to sell more on the local market and to sell less as exports, and so it means that on the local market there is more supply, and so there is a decrease in the local price, and so from that you can understand that how vary consumptions and production.